Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor of Datamation, and our topic today is big data, getting started with big data, choosing a big data solution. To talk about that, we've got four industry experts. With us is Eli Collins, Chief Technologist with Cloudera. Eli, how are you today?
Great, thanks for having me.
You know, I think people are probably pretty well familiar with Cloudera, as actually all four of your companies, but why don't you give me the short sort of 10-second elevator pitch. What exactly does Cloudera do for those folks who don't know?
Yeah, so Cloudera helps companies get value out of their data. We're a software company, and we've been in business for about 6 years, and our technology is based on Apache Hadoop.
Hadoop gets a lot of buzz these days.
So,
Will Hayes is the CEO of LucidWorks. Hello to you, Will.
Hi, how are you guys doing? So LucidWorks, we're the commercial entity behind Lucene and Solar. That's a search technology, one of the most widely deployed search technologies out there, and our goal is to really help companies drive data-driven applications, whether that's sitting on things like Cloudera Hadoop, powering e-commerce websites and other knowledge applications.
Great. Bobby Coratella is the Chief Product Officer of Infogix. Hello to you, Bobby. Why don't you give me the short sort of 10-second elevator pitch. What exactly does Cloudera do for those folks who don't know?
yeah, so Cloudera helps companies get value out of their data. We're a software company.
Is that a delay for some reason?
Business for about 6 years, and our technology is based on Apache Hadoop.
Hadoop gets a lot of buzz.
There's a replay going on here.
I wonder where that would be. Because I think I only have the one browser window open.
I just closed all mine. So if it
You
was
did close all yours?
Yep.
Well, let's try. Well, the worst we can do is blow up the internet. You know, when we don't want to do that. Bobby, I think we had gotten to you. Hello to you, and tell us what exactly does Infogix do?
Yeah, thanks for having me, James. Infogix is a company that's been around for about 32 years now. We work with large Fortune 500 tech companies. We've provided data integrity and data quality type of solutions over the years, and lately we've been working with companies on data analytics solutions as well, creating analytic results with clean data.
Good deal. And Peter Schlepp is a Senior VP of Product at Platfora. Hello to you, Peter.
Morning, James. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Good, good. So tell us a little bit about Platfora.
Sure. Platfora is an enterprise software company. We deliver big data analytics, which is native to Hadoop, allowing your average enterprise to be able to get value out of the big data that they pull together into their repository of big data.
How long has Platfora been around?
Been around since 2011, so 3 years, and it's a lot has packed into those 3 years.
I bet, yeah. So big data, I know the four of you have seen a lot, you know, as big data has really taken hold among businesses. I mean, so what advice would you give if there was a business just getting going with big data? Either they're looking for a solution, or maybe they have a solution and they want to, get up to speed with it. What piece of advice would you give them? Hey, you need to be aware of this. Eli, why don't you start us off with that? What advice would you give, newbie companies with big data?
Yeah, if it's one, if I had to summarize it into one point, it would be start small and iterate from there, and start with a business problem. So it's a lot of new technology. It can be pretty overwhelming if you kind of try to come at it from bottom up. So start top down with identifying one important analytics problem that's key to the business, and try to execute on that, and then use that progression of starting small and iterating as a way to both make progress and get value out of the technology, but also add more use cases incrementally, versus try to kind of swallow the platform, bottom up and overnight. So don't try to become Yahoo, in 6 months.
Makes a lot of sense. Peter, agree, start small, or what advice would you give?
Probably very similar to Eli, which is pick a few use cases, maybe start with one that is really important to the business, and as you think about that use case, think about the questions that your business needs to answer. What are the valuable questions that are going to make a difference to your business goals? Think about the people that need to be involved in that process. Who needs access to the data? Who's part of developing these questions? And then finally, think about the data that you're going to need to be able to answer those questions. Quite often, a lot of companies, hey, I've got big data, and then they realize that it's dispersed across many data sources or data silos across their organization, even outside, and they don't think about how are we going to get it together. And I think one of the pitfalls that companies made is kind of thinking about this from a technology perspective. I think kind of similar to what Eli said, and they say, let's go pick some big piece of technology and that's going to solve it for me. Let's go pick a Hadoop, for instance, and then you end up making a big technology investment and not getting anything out of it. So again, focus on a few key use cases and make those successful.
Know what your goal is to begin with, yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Bobby, what would you say? Someone is maybe floundering with big data, or they want to get more to their application. What piece of advice would you give to them?
I guess I would say don't get confused by the lingo around big data. There's a difference between what a big data store is and a regular relational data store that has a lot of data in it. There are certain conditions that I think a big data store needs to meet. It's not equivalent to Hadoop, but having a distributed processing environment, lots of data, particular kinds of storing that data, different kinds of data, structured, unstructured. So I would say don't get confused by that terminology and pick a truly big data solution. And secondly, I would say avoid some of the pitfalls that legacy applications that have dealt with large amounts of data have dealt with. For example, in the warehousing space, people used to throw data in all the time without having any controls on the kind of data that you threw in there, and then you wondered about why the results didn't make sense. With big data as well, the same kind of considerations apply, and you need to take that into consideration when you put that in place.
What do you mean when you say a truly big data solution? Are there some semi-fake, semi-real solutions out there?
Well, I don't know if I'd characterize them as fake, but I think there's been a lot of jumping on the bandwagon ever since big data is caught on as a term out there. Pretty much every database vendor out there claims they're big data now. Pretty much every ETL vendor out there claims they deal with big data. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the market in terms of what is big data then? Is it just if I have a lot of data? And you've had analysts go out there and say that as well. Hey, if you just have a lot of data, that's big data. Well, sorry, no, that's not equivalent.
There's a need to be processing it for sure.
Exactly.
Will, what advice would you give to people getting started with big data?
I think everything that's said so far, I mean, is spot on. The biggest pitfall that we see is people sort of not approaching it from a use case or a problem, and really trying to approach it from a platform, trying to find a home. And again, I couldn't reiterating sort of what was already said. I mean, really understanding your data sources, understanding the different types or the characteristics in terms of what you want to get out of it. I mean, big data to me and to LucidWorks, it's really a movement around leveraging information. And that information can be large, it can be small, it can be stored in things like Apache Hadoop, it can be stored in a search engine. We often remind people that a lot of new information can be extracted from even your relational databases and warehouses that you already have. So I think just not coming at it from an approach of I've got a platform, now I need to go find a solution, but really look for a problem that you want to solve, understand the characteristics of the data that are going to help you solve that problem, and then find the right home for that information in terms of the applications that you're trying to build or the solutions you're trying to provide for the business.
And I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but I think one of the problems that people run into is exactly part of it. Find a problem you want to solve is kind of what you recommended, but sometimes people don't even know what that application or what that solution, what that platform can solve.
Right.
So they might be flying blind a little bit until they get the hang of it. I guess which leads somewhat to our second question is that, I think a lot of companies get confused. They get confused, and what is a typical confusion and/or mistake and/or just complete utter lack of knowledge that you see sometimes out there in the marketplace?
Well, take an abstract of the problem, right?
Go ahead.
It's really about what's an area of my business that I'd like more insight into. Is it the behavior of my customers? Is it conversations that are happening out there in social media within the reviews? Are there operational metrics that I feel that if I had better insight and visibility into where things are, I could find optimization? So you don't necessarily have to have a question looking for an answer, but there's always going to be a domain in which you feel that I can enrich my understanding with more information. Let me figure out where's the intersection of both data and process that I can identify an area to create that optimization, and then I'll go gather the data sources necessary and find the right home to drive those solutions. So you can always think one level higher in terms of what do I want to do better within my organization or within my business.
Peter, what's the confusion you see out there in the marketplace that if you could just snap your, snap your fingers, wave a magic wand, you'd make it go away?
Well, I think there's two things for me. One is I think that there's this myth or confusion that we need, and frankly we've done it to ourselves. It's about the data scientist. You know, a couple years ago, the common the theme was that we needed a million new data scientists over the course of the next decade within the United States to kind of meet the needs of big data. And if you're a company, and the reality is if you're a company outside of Silicon Valley or maybe New York, it's pretty hard to find data scientists, and you might be scared off by starting a project without having all the resources that you need. And I think that's unfortunately we've kind of misled the industry our customers in that way. And so, you know, there's plenty of companies out there today. There's packaged solutions that can help people get up and going with big data quickly. There's great thriving Hadoop distributions and other data NoSQL distributions that are getting people up and going quickly. So I wouldn't be afraid. So what you need is a couple smart people in IT. You might need a data scientist, and you need that use case that we talked about. Then the second thing, if I could wave my wand, is for people to be constantly looking for ways to retrofit big data into their existing systems. They think, I've got this existing system that I use day in, day out, and somehow if I put big data on the input or that goes into, then somehow I'm going to get better answers coming out. And that's not. I don't think that's a well thought out strategy. The truth is this is a different world, and we need technologies that are built in this era that give people access to all of the power and richness that big data can bring to an organization. So you really need a native solution, as opposed to thinking about ways to retrofit every old piece of technology to this new world.
Eli, a confusion you see out in the marketplace, something that people really get confused about?
Yeah, I mean, people spend a lot of time talking about the technology, and I tend to try to bucket the conversations into two things that we and the other companies here help people with. One is helping them solve problems using data. So people want to use analysis for customer return. Another is solving data infrastructure problems that people have, their data problems. So my I can know my strategy for ingesting and transforming data for my existing systems isn't working, right? And so what happens is people tend to talk about big data, and they use kind of umbrella large categories, and you get less and less defocused from the goal, which we kind of talked about in their previous question, which is focus on the business problem, focus on the use cases. So I think a lot of the confusion is really around coming bottom up versus coming top down from what you're trying to do. So sometimes that confusion around the technology is really more confusion around what they want to use with data. Because once you start saying, hey, I need to use data to solve this problem, or I have this data infrastructure problem, we can all do a pretty good job of tackling those piecemeal. What's harder is these kind of more amorphous things, which is, I have infrastructure, I bring big data to it, what next? And that's, that just leads to a lot of confusing conversations.
Let me understand what you're saying to be sure. You're saying don't focus as much on the technology, focus on the question you're trying to ask? Yeah,
so the technology is only interesting in the case that it serves two high-level purposes. One is you might have a technology problem, like you have a data infrastructure problem, and understanding the technology is important in terms of evaluating how it can help solve that particular problem. So maybe maybe you're already doing analytics, but you've decided to ingest a new data source, and it's the structure or the volume or some component of it just isn't fitting with your existing system. Right. And so you already know the value of the data, you're just having a hard time doing the things that you'd like to do with it. Or you want to enable a new algorithm and the existing technology doesn't support that. A second class of discussion is, companies are, one of the kind of macro trends going on is people understand that they need to use data to make their products better, which leads them to want to be more data-driven, which leads them to get interested in the technology. And the discussion there is saying, hey, well, how do you want to make your products or services better with data? And then for that specific example, how does the technology serve that, right? And basically, these two lenses serve as a way to really narrow down the scope of conversation. So you're not talking about, the 30, 40 some odd random open source projects and the, large ecosystem of tools and whatnot. You can have a 3-day conversation just about the big data ecosystem, but never actually arrive at a solution to, either a data infrastructure problem or how to use data to make your business better, which is fundamentally why, which is why we exist as companies, is to solve one of those two problems.
Bobby, what's your take? Is there a confusion out there that you wish you could, amend with a few short words?
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to what Eli said as well, Jim, if I were to categorize how people are using big data today, I would put it into 2 categories, if you will. One category, you folks have probably all heard of data lakes, right? I mean, essentially, a lot of enterprises today will collect data from other data stores, other data sources, bring it together, whether it's virtually or actually put it in a single data store, and then run big data analytics or something on it. That's one use case, or that's one category of use cases that we see. The other use case, or category of use cases, is really using a big data repository more as an operational data store, if you will. For example, you might have an insurance firm that sends you these little things that you plug into your car, which monitors your driving behavior. Well, that generates a lot of data, and that typically would sit in a big data repository. That's more of an operational type of use case as opposed to this data lake kind of use case that we see. What we see more often is the data lake kind of use case. And in either of those instances, from our perspective, right, because we're concerned about data integrity and how it works with data analytics, we think you have to have controls with data going into it. And a lot of times the confusion that we encounter is people are told, just set it up, throw the data in there, run your analytics, and you're good to go. Well, it's not quite that simple.
Right. I'd like us to go a little deeper in the technology if we can. I've spoken to the 4 of you with, a variety of topics. If there's a topic you think in particular, do sort of a little deep dive on it. Will, for example, we talked about silos, whether or not they exist, whether you can change silos. Peter, I know we talked about, getting access to the information without being curated by IT.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't you start? Is silos something in particular you would point to as a key technology to deal with? Oh yeah, I think you are on mute for a second, but
yeah,
now you're
sorry. There's a lot of background noise. I was trying to get that up.
Okay.
I think the notion of a silo is both sort of a mental block that we tend to think in, and then there's sort of the physical aspect of the platform or the hardware. I think ultimately we want to get to more efficiency. So the idea that we can take advantage of things like HDFS and some of these data stores that allow us to intermingle more information to drive multiple applications, I mean, that's really an optimization that reduces the silos within the enterprise. But I think when we think about the mental problem and going back to the use case or going back to the solution that you're trying to build within the organization, these are typically going to be siloed solutions. So again, thinking about it from the aspect of I'm going to dump everything into a data lake, now I've reduced all the silos, now I can go answer hundreds of questions, is not a real practical way to look at a solution like that. But to think about it in terms of, for instance, I want to get more insight into customer behavior. What do I need for that? Well, I need activity coming from my website. I want to look at chatter and social media. I want to look at any other inputs I have, whether it's reviews or likes or things that are going in through my site. And that's a silo within an application or within a certain intersection of information which is going to drive that solution or drive that application. Now, from there, you can look at it and say, okay, do we have a repository like Hadoop where we can store this information? Maybe we consume some of it into a search index. Maybe some of it sits into a structured Hive or HBase or something of that sort. But again, trying to approach the problem and saying, I'm going to eliminate silos within my organization, drive lots of applications, well, that's kind of a meaningless statement unless you understand the solution. So embrace the silo, but just try to broaden the intersection of data and then optimize on the back end around the platform and the hardware so you're just saving money ultimately.
Peter, I think you talked about trying to get access, giving people access to the information without it being curated by IT.
Sure, it's not really, without necessarily it being curated by IT, but how do we, in this new big data world, how do we really make business analysts empowered to do what they need to do and help actually IT be efficient at what they do too? And so I kind of think of, this is an issue that was well known in the small data world, where you had a small set of people in an organization that built reports and dashboards for the business users and executives, and every time they had a new question, you had to kind of wait behind that process. But now in the big data world, that problem is multiplied times 3. You've got more data. You still have to make decisions about what data is available and what data is not available. Even if you put all of it in HDFS, you still need to make decisions about what's fast and what's not fast. Then you have more and more data sets. It seems like there's a new data set every day. If we talked, with the example that Will was just using about maybe a customer analytics example where you're understanding your customer's clickstream data, and all of a sudden you want to bring in some social media data. How do I, when those new data sets come in, how do we allow a business user to get access to them quickly? And then finally, the speed that data is coming at us is also multiplying this problem. So as a business thinks about this new big data architecture that they need to put together, I like to think of an insight pipeline that a business is building. How do they make that as efficient as possible, considering the size of the data that's coming in, how many new data sources are coming in all the time, and really the velocity, and so you're simply not going to be able to handle that if there's a checkpoint where IT or a data scientist is doing something every single time there's a new question. It's
too many
much worse. And so you have to build this insight pipeline where the business analyst is at the middle, and they're able to get out of this new big data repository that we're all talking about what they need.
Eli, I think you actually used the phrase converged analytics, which sounds like a very fancy phrase that we should all probably know. Is that something you would do a deep dive on, or what's your sense on that?
Yeah, so Converged Analytics is just a fancy way of incorporating new data sets into your analytics. So Peter made the point that we're getting a new data set added every day. A lot of the use cases that are driving the big data technology adoption are these use cases that revolve around new data sets. So I'll give you an example. How frustrating is it that you call into a call center? You've been using their website, you've been using their products, and yet they have no context about why you might be calling or who you'd want to speak with,
right,
or who you might want to have. So we have a customer who's doing analytics of all their click logs, combined with the data from their operational systems, that user profiles and whatnot, to do a better job predicting why you're calling, or when you do get connected to someone, what you were doing on the website, which might indicate what you might be having problems with or what you're interested in, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is a case of taking a new data set, which is click streams from the site, plus all this existing operational data which they had before, and getting more of a 360 view of what how their customer is interacting with their products, and then using that insight to deliver better service. In this case, support. So Converged Analytics is just the ability to incorporate these new data sets to make our products better through data. And it's something that we're seeing, that's driving some of the interest and adoption of the technology, because it's an enabler for those types of use cases.
Well, in a sense, all of big data or any big data solution should include converged analytics then, as the way you're defining it.
There's valuable use cases that are not converged analytics. I mean, if you could just do huge scale, large ETL processing on one type of data set. Or free text search on all your call records, and that would be big data and valuable. So converged analytics is, I think, just one particular class of use case that we see, but it's not the only one. It's kind of a more advanced use case.
Bobby, you and I talked about using a big data repository. You may have already spoken about that a little bit, but what's a focus of big data technology you might do a little deep dive on?
Well, I mean, I think from a repository standpoint, it's like I touched on it earlier, which is either whether you consolidate it into some kind of data lake, or you look at an operational data store, or however you approach it, right? And I think what we're all referring to the same thing in different terminology. Peter talked about this as insight pipelines. Eli talked about this as converged analytics. But in the end, and I think Will also referred to this as how do you how do you use your various data sources to derive a particular insight or answer certain questions, right? In the end, I think that's the ultimate objective of a big data store. You use it, you pull relevant information together, and apply certain analytics, let's call it analytics, different techniques, you could call it that as well, to derive certain answers. The approach that we've taken is that even before you get to that point, you have to have data quality, you have to have data integrity, you have to have controls on the data that's coming in, because garbage in, garbage out. If you're looking at garbage, you're essentially picking through garbage to get insights that don't make sense. We've all encountered this in the data warehouse world, where you collect all the data, you come up with some kind of report, and people say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That's not what I'm seeing in my operational data store. Except in big data, there's so much data going in that everyone's scared to question that anymore, because they don't even understand the data that's going in there, because there's so much. So from a data repository standpoint, Jim, what you and I talked about was you've got to pay attention to how you're collecting all of that data in one place in the first place before you can get to actually applying analytics and getting the answers that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. I think businesses are really eager to know where this is all going, because they may be on board now, or maybe they're still shopping for a solution, but they would love to know what this is going to look like, say, 1, 3, 5 years from now, so they can sort of tailor their approach to that. I mean, if you can look into your crystal ball, and I think the four of you have a special vantage point for that. Where is this going, and what should businesses be aware of as they think about the future? Will, what does your crystal ball tell you about where this is going?
So we work with organizations on this notion of sort of a data-driven paradigm, and that's an overused term, but ultimately, we experience this today in the consumer world, and there's a lot of companies that have done a brilliant job. So if you think about what does Amazon mean when you log in and you view a home page, and what's that data-driven experience that they give you, or something like a Google Now or a Siri. And so the vision that we help craft with enterprises is, what does it mean for your enterprise application to be more Amazon-like, to be more Siri-like, where we're actually pushing notifications, pushing findings to you as we're doing all of this compute and this join, and we're bringing in different sources of information, we're finding new insight. How do those discoveries reach the end user? And then providing a context on top of that. So context could mean, if I'm on a mobile device and I'm traveling somewhere in Chicago and I have a customer engagement coming and something happens in the news, there's a shift in the market, information is being driven to me via the application. So that's kind of the notion of what the Internet of Things is meant to be, but it's sort of the Internet of Things in the context of individuals and human beings that makes it the most exciting.
Peter, what are we going to be talking about when we talk about big data 3 years from now? What's the buzz going to be?
Well, I can guarantee you, over the course of the next 3 years, we'll have probably at least 6 different bright new shiny objects that we all face after quickly. That's been happening.
New platforms or new?
Well, there's new things that literally they're coming out every 6 months, and I think one of the things that makes enterprises kind of afraid of big data is trying to make a decision about what's on. What could I be choosing something that's the wrong thing? And so, if I were to talk to enterprise today about where are we going to be in 2 to 4 years, I think that there's 2 things in my mind that are pretty definitive. And one is probably clear to everybody that's on this hangout, which is Hadoop is on. HDFS is happening, and maybe a couple years ago there was doubt about it, but I was just reading an article yesterday in the Register where Intel was saying that the #1 application in the data center in a couple years is going to be Hadoop.
Really?
More servers running Hadoop than any other application in the data center, which is pretty incredible, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not, at this point, if you're an enterprise and you're not thinking about your enterprise data hub or data reservoir, data lake strategy, you are going to probably be falling behind if you're not starting to think about that now. And then I think the second thing I would say is, which has more momentum than any new bright shiny object that I've seen in a long time, is Spark. And maybe not all the enterprises out there are informed about Spark, but Spark is an important new development. It is the new parade, I think, in big data. And it's important for a couple reasons. It's bringing new advanced analytical techniques that have been promised for a long time, like predictive analytics, machine learning, even graph processing, to a much higher level audience, using easier programming paradigms than MapReduce, for instance. And that's going. And on top of that, you've got all the open source developers really flocking to this new technology. So that's where the source of innovation is going to be over the next couple of years. So, be thinking about your enterprise data hub strategy as well as making sure you're picking a platform that's going to support Spark.
Mm-hmm. Bobby, what do you see? A few years out, what do companies need to be thinking about if they want to be ready for the future in big data?
I agree with what's been said up to now. I do think that I don't know if Hadoop necessarily is going to be the end all, but I think everything is going to converge into big data. The amount of data is increasing. What we can do around big data is getting more sophisticated. And I will say this, I think there are some folks out there saying that big data will go away, we'll go back to the old Oracle SQL Server, RDBMS world. I don't see that happening at all. I think we're quickly going to go into this realm where newer technologies like Spark, HDFS is a file system for Hadoop, those are going to be the basis for how we actually process data. But I will say this too, there's important lessons that we've learned over the years that we need to apply going forward as well. And again, I'm going to bring up my perspective, which has to do with data integrity, data quality, things like that. Unless you have that going in, everything you generate out of your big data repository isn't going to make sense. And people need to pay attention to that as they go into this brave new world.
Mm-hmm. Eli, what does the future hold in terms of big data a few years out?
Yeah, I like everything that's been said so far. I think one of the things we'll see people stop talking. They'll talk less about the core technologies and start talking about what data can do. I think the specific example of that is really getting data integrated into not just the infrastructure but into their products. So, for example, today there's a lot of use of big data to do better analytics, but it's still a better way of doing something we already do. I think, so rather than have data flow into the system, have advanced new tools for processing and visualizing it, and then finally, giving us insight, we're going to see more of the results of what's going on in those systems feeding back directly into the applications. So the applications are going to start getting enriched by the analytics. So rather than some insight going into your BI tool and giving a human being a better understanding of the business, that's awesome and that's going away. That's not going away. There's also going to be a chain where you say, hey, what? The output of a lot of this analytics should be fed immediately back into the applications themselves and the services, kind of enriching them. So that macro trend. The second is just the development of the product ecosystem. So actually, some of the companies here with us today are good examples of that, which is we've done a lot in the base platforms to add new capabilities, and people are building better and better tools to take advantage of the capabilities in the platform that were not there in previous systems. So rather than just being a system that's bigger, faster, cheaper, if you look at the new types of BI tools or the new types of transformation tools that people are building, those are things that you can't do in existing systems. And so I think continuing to watch the ecosystem of products built on top of these big data platforms is going to be really interesting because we're in the early days of that. If you think about how long the traditional BI industry took to build up, it was decades, and we're only in the first decade of our parallel journey.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. I appreciate the four of your expertise. I think hopefully people learn something. I will send the four of you a link, and we can all promote it. But it was really great. I thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.
So we